Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. We're on day 71, and today, before we get into some new grammar later in this chapter, we're going to just learn some pretty useful vocabulary for countries, nationalities, and languages. So let's start off first with a poster with the famous communist slogan here. You see Marx. Пролетарии всех стран соединяйтесь. Proletariats, meaning the working classes of all nations, come together, unite. And another one, an anti-American one. В СССР строят новые школы, а в США их закрывают. In the USSR, they're building new schools, and in the US, they're closing them. And we see this Soviet schoolgirl here. She's wearing her pioneers, her red necktie, and she's got some flowers, which suggests that this is supposed to be the first day of school when students would often they'll take flowers and things for their teachers, and it's still today in Russia kind of a big deal. And most students in Russia today even wear some kind of uniform that's not too dissimilar to what this girl's wearing. And again, they take flowers on the first day of school traditionally. Okay, so let's look at nouns for countries. Страны мира, right, countries of the world. And of course, I haven't listed every country here, but I tried to list those just major countries, especially European ones, and those in the sort of, as they call it, post-Soviet space, right? So this is more sort of from the Russian point of view, just countries that you hear spoken of for various reasons in Russia. By the way, be sure you learn the name of the country you're studying. This seems to be an ongoing problem for students, and it's kind of frustrating. I think the trouble is this word is a little bit tricky because you've got a vowel reduction, right? So note how we're spelling it. Ro, right? Rossiya. No U there. Again, I think the U in English causes a little bit of interference here. And we pronounce it ra, right? Because of the vowel reduction. Rossiya, Rossiya. It's a special soft feminine. So if you don't know that word yet, and again, based on experience, I'm guessing about half of you probably don't, be sure and nail that down, right? That's just, talk about essential vocab. That's just that's got to be like top 10 words you want to know, right? And be able to pronounce properly. Okay, I'll read through the list here just for kicks, right? And you'll notice most of these are feminine, and indeed most of them are special soft feminine. And then we have a couple of masculines thrown in the mix. America, or for short, США, США, if we're reading it really clearly, but normally it just sounds more like США, like two syllables. Anglia, Canada, Испания, Франция, Германия, Italia, Grecia, Portugalia, Голландия, Китай, there's a soft masculine, Япония, Южная Корея, India, Dania, Norvegia, Швеция, Швейцария, and those two are kind of easy to confuse, right? Швеция and Швейцария. Finlandia, Israel, there's a soft masculine. Polsha, Czechia, Slovakia, Serbia, Хорватия, Bosnia, Ukraine, Belarusia, Bulgaria, Vengria, Romania, Latvia, Estonia, Litva, right, the Baltic countries there, Turcia. Russia has a long history with Turkey. They were really antagonists for a very long time, right? They fought several wars between the two of them, and a lot of Russians go to vacation in Turkey. It's a quick fun to walk down memory lane. I worked for a large company in Russia for a couple of years, and one year they took our department to Turkey to a resort for a quote-unquote team building experience, right? And I won't speak exactly what the team building consisted of, but it involved a lot of all-you-can-eat, all-you-can-drink hospitality there at the resort. It was very nice. Anyway, moving right along. Chechnya is Chechnya. Chechnya, I don't know how we say that in English. Chechnya, I guess. Chechnya in Russian, note the stress, right? Some of these stresses are maybe a little bit surprising for English speakers. Gruzia, right? Georgia, the country, of course, not the state, obviously. We're moving now into the Caucasus, right? Armenia, Uzbekistan, and then also Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and those ending in stan, right? Stan, I think, means basically country or land in these Turkic languages, and they're, of course, masculine. Okay, so again, those are just basically nouns. There's not really much to say about them in terms of grammar, but we could practice using the locative, for example, or for where have you been? I was in these countries. And then to where are you going? That would, of course, require the accusative. So very useful constructions. Where were you? Где вы были? Let's say я был в whatever. Я был в России, в Китае, в Украине, во Франции. Note there the mobile vowel coming in because we have a FR cluster. В Польше. Okay, we can say the same thing. We'll express the same idea with where are you going? By the way, we could express the exact same idea by saying куда вы ездили, or if you remember that from the verb of motion discussion we had, right? We could ask where were you or where did you go to round trip? Here we're asking something a little bit different, right? Where are you headed right now? Where are you going? В plus accusative. Я еду в Россию, в Китай, в Украину, во Францию, в Польшу. Okay, what about nationality? So these are nouns used to refer to people from these various countries, and so the forms obviously are going to be related mostly to the country names we just learned, but with slight differences. And we'll see that a few of these are adjectival, like actually starting out with Ruski, Ruskaya. You can see that that's just an adjective, meaning like a Russian man, a Russian woman. But most of the other ones are going to end in either yet, which is a little masculine suffix denoting a person, in this case, a person from the given country. And then typically you'll have a feminine equivalent that replaces the yet, the masculine suffix, with ka. So generally that's fairly predictable, although you'll notice a few little discrepancies here and there. It's not always simply a matter of replacing yets with ka, but that's the general pattern. Okay, so I'll just read these. Американец, американка, Anglichanin, Anglichanka. By the way, some of these nationalities, you'll notice they end in, and those nouns follow a rather peculiar pattern. For example, the plural of Anglichanin is not Anglichaninly, as you might guess. It's Anglichania. So we'll talk more about that in book 4. We'll talk about that in some detail when we cover these kind of unusual noun types. But for now, just kind of be careful using these. They don't follow the pattern, at least in the plural, that most masculine nouns do. I should add that in the singular, they act normally. Okay, anyway, so Anglichanin, Anglichanka, Канадец, Канадка, Испанец, Испанка, Французец, Француженка, Немец, Немка, Итальянец, Итальянка, Грек, Гречанка, Португалец, Португалка, Голландец, Голландка, Китаец, Китаянка, Японец, Японка, Кореец, Кореянка, Индиец, Индиянка, Датчанин, Dachanka. There's another Dachanin, right? The plural of that is Dachania. So that's very unexpected for us. Norvegец, Norvежка, Швед, Шведка, Швейцарец, Швейцарка, Finn, Finka. You'll notice a few of these don't have the yets suffix. Israeltyanin, Israeltyanka. And so that's obviously a person from Israel. The noun, maybe I didn't give it to you in the book. In case you're wondering, the noun for a Jewish person, obviously not necessarily from Israel, is Yevrei, Yevreika. And again, you notice that this term for someone from Israel is Israeltyanin. So the plural of that would be Israeltyania. Again, an unusual noun type. Okay, someone from Poland, Polyak, Polka, Czech, Czeszka, Slovak, Slovachka, Serb, Serbka, Хорват, Хорватка, Bosniец, Bosnika, Ukrainец, Ukrainka, Bulgarin, Bulgarka, again the unusual noun type. The plural would be Bulgaria, Belarus, Belaruska, Venger, Vengerka, someone from Hungary, Rumun, Rumunka, Latviец, Latvika, Estonets, Estonka, right from Estonia, Latvia, Litovets, Litovka. Okay, from Turkey, Turce, we have Turk, a Turkish man, and Turchanka, which is a Turkish woman. And by the way, check your book. In an earlier edition, I had Turka here, and that's just a total goof on my part. But it does get a bit confusing sometimes with these nationality nouns. A Turka, which certainly looks like it could be the female version of Turk, that typically refers to a Turkish style little coffee pot with the long handle that they used to make to serve coffee Turkish style, which maybe you've seen that. But so anyway, a turka is a thing. A turchanka should be the proper term. So be sure that's correct in your book on page 101. Turchanka. Chechnya, Chechenets, Chechenka. Gruzin, Gruzinka. Armenian, Armyanka from Armenia. Uzbek, Uzbechka. Kazakh, Kazachka. Azerbaijanets, Azerbaijanka. Okay, so let's just practice these a bit, right? And say, for example, Russians live in Russia, right? So the nationality lives in whatever nation. Русские живут где, right? We need the prepositional. В России. Американцы живут в Америке. Французы живут во Франции. Немцы живут в Германии. So, by the way, you see the Russian for German isn't related to Germania, right? It's the country name. It's a different root. And actually, this is a Slavic word meaning mute ones. We may have discussed that earlier, but a Niemiec generally is kind of a very old Slavic word for people who, so to speak, don't belong to the Slavic tribe and don't speak Slavic and are therefore unintelligible or, so to speak, mute. So anyway, Немцы живут в Германии. Китайцы живут в Китае, финны живут в Финляндии, англичане живут в Англии, шведы живут в Швеции, армяне живут в Армении, сербы живут в Сербии, итальянцы живут в Италии, японцы живут в Японии, турки живут в Турции, Израильтяне живут в Израиле. Now note there's a masculine country name, right? Not too common. And just for fun, Marcianie. What do you think that refers to? Well, a Marcianian is someone who lives on Mars, right? Mars. And again, you see in 14, 15, 16, we've got three examples of these actually in number 7 too, right? These unusual nouns that end in the singular, but then take nye in the nominative plural. So Marcianie is the plural of Marcianian, and Marcianie живут на Марсе. They live on Mars. Инопланетяне живут, right? So these are people from other planets, beings from other планеты, инопланетяне. And we could say that they живут на других планетах. And that would be an example of the prepositional plural, right? That they live on other planets, and we're going to learn that case along with all of the remaining plural case forms in this chapter. Okay, you may have noticed going through that list that when we're referring to people from a certain country collectively, right, Russian defaults to the masculine forms, right? So just something to watch out for. For example, в нашей группе было 5 немцев. That masculine form, 5 Germans, that could mean all men or mixed company. If you said в нашей группе было 5 немок, that would mean specifically that there were 5 German women, and that would be, unambiguous. But otherwise, you default to the masculine, and you can't know for sure if that's mixed company or all male. Okay, so let's practice again now these pairs. This gets a bit tricky. Are you going from the male to the female, version of whatever nationality? So let's try some of these. Он немец, его девушка тоже немка. So we're saying things like he's a German, his girlfriend is also German, but again, we've got to use now the feminine version of German. Они немки, so they are German women. Their boyfriends are also German. Их парни тоже немцы. Она американка. She's an American girl. Her husband is also American. Ее муж тоже американец. Number 4, they are Czech. Their girlfriends are also Czech. Они чехи, их девушки тоже чешки. 5. Он русский, so this remember is an adjective. His wife is also Russian. Его жена тоже русская. 6. Они французы, they are French men. Their wives are also French. Их жены тоже француженки. 7. Они итальянки, so they're Italian women. Their husbands are also Italian. Их мужья тоже итальянцы. 8. Он канадец, he's a Canadian. His girlfriend is also Canadian. Его девушка тоже канадка. Let's see. Она англичанка, she is an English girl. Her fiancé, жених, is also an English man or whatever. Ее жених тоже англичанин. 10. Он фин, he's a Finn. His bride, his fiancée, невеста, is also a Finnish person. Его невеста тоже финка. Okay, number 11, he's a Turk. His wife is also Turkish. Его жена тоже турчанка. 12, она украинка. She's Ukrainian. Ее муж тоже украинец. Okay, let's practice some of these nouns again, reviewing what we know about numbers, right? I would say in our group there were 5 American men, 6 American women. В нашей группе было 5 американцев, genitive plural, и 6 американок. Number 2, на нашем курсе были 2 Spanish men, 4 Spanish women. 2 испанца и 4 испанки, there with the genitive singular. В нашей школе был, okay, now we've got 1, right? So the verb would change. We would get a singular verb. Один китаец. Or в нашей школе была одна китаянка. 4. На вечеринке были, okay, now we've got compound numbers. 23 шведа. And then for 25, we should, again, this is, again, kind of, there's some gray territory here, but if we're being really, if we're being sticklers about the grammar, we should say было 25 шведок, right? 25 Swedish women. Okay, finally, adjectives, right? So what are the adjectival equivalents of these, these country nouns we learned earlier? Well, again, for the most part, they're fairly predictable, and we see, I think all of them are going to basically end in ski, at least the ones that are adjectival, that are truly adjectival. We have a few exceptions. Okay, so these adjectives, of course, could be used to refer to anything from the country, including the language, right? So русский язык is the Russian language, or simply русский for short. So let's read through these quickly. Русский, английский, испанский, французский, немецкий, итальянский, греческий, португальский, голландский, китайский, японский, корейский, Hindi, and now you can see obviously that's not an adjective. That would be well, these words for, if we're speaking of the language, actually, Hindi would be the language, obviously, and that would be a noun and an indeclinable one, right? Like any borrowed noun that ends up ending in an E, Russian isn't going to decline that. Датский, норвежский, шведский, финский, ivrit. Okay, there's another Hebrew, right? There's another, it's simply a noun, right? So we would say, for example, in the Hebrew language would be na ivritie. Polski, чешский, словацкий, сербский, хорватский, боснийский, украинский, bulgarski. By the way, if you're curious, Serbian, Croatian, and Bosnian, right? Nowadays, for political reasons, those are listed as separate languages. And, again, that's kind of up for debate. Are they dialects of one language? Are they different languages? Obviously, there's cultural differences and whatnot. But in case you're just curious about Slavic, those languages are extremely similar. It's such that you can study all three really simultaneously. And there's a nice textbook out there that covers all three kind of in one fell swoop. Because, again, the grammar is virtually identical. There are just a few variations. There's some different vocab. And so forth, right? But anyway, Ukrainsky, Bulgarsky, Белорусский, Венгерский, Румынский, Латышский, Estonski, Litovski, Турецкий, Чеченский, Грузинский, Armянский, Uzbekski, Kazakhski, Azerbaijanski, and finally Latin. I threw in there just for you Latin scholars, and you notice that that is also a noun. Okay, so by the way, if you are talking about languages and like in what language is a text, or if you're translating from one language to another, which we'll learn more about, we'll learn how to say that later. Remember that язык is treated as a noun. So we say, for example, do you have a book literally on Russian, on the Russian language? У вас есть книги на русском языке? Again, if one of these were a noun, you would say instead of на русском, на английском, etc., you would say на иврите, на хинди, and so forth. Okay, now another very useful form that we've seen, and now we could create these forms from any of these adjectives here, is по hyphen and then the adverbial version of the adjective. And note again the all-important shortening, right? We get rid of the краткое, we get this shorter form, which is actually an adverb. And this means something like по-русски means something literally like in the Russian way. So you can do almost anything in the Russian way, like Russians do. But the most common use, I suppose, is speaking the language, right? Speak in the Russian way, or as we'd say, do you speak Russian? Вы говорите по-русски. Я плохо понимаю по-русски. Again, if it's a language that's a noun like Hebrew, you would have to say мы говорим на иврите, right? Because there just isn't this convenient adjectival form. Okay, now if we're studying a language, we're back to this other idiom with изучать, right? And we would say мы изучаем русский язык, right? And also I know languages, я знаю английский, немецкий и русский языки. Note there that if we do include the word язык here in formal Russian, that should be plural, right? Because we're talking about English, German, Russian languages, right? There are actually 3 languages. And so the correct, again, in terms of like formal grammar, we should say языки if we choose to include the noun. Okay, so let's just practice these a bit with the exercise here and say in Russia, they speak in the Russian way. They speak Russian, right? So remember, по, be sure to include the hyphen here and not to include the краткое. В России говорят по-русски. В Англии говорят по-английски. В Германии говорят по-немецки. В Финляндии говорят по-фински. В Китае говорят по-китайски. Во Франции говорят по-французски. В Чехии говорят по-чешски. В Израиле говорят на иврите. В Японии, by the way, they speak a lot of Russian, of course, in Israel as well, as you may know. Anyway, 9. В Японии говорят по-японски. 10. В Польше говорят по-польски. 11. In Norway they speak Norwegian. В Норвегии говорят по-норвежски. В Сербии говорят по-сербски. В Испании говорят по-испански. And в Украине говорят по-украински. Okay, finally, just some more vocab quickly. What about just continents and major regions? And again, I've thrown in a few things here that are very commonly heard in Russia. First, the continent: Северная Америка, Южная Америка, Европа, Восточная Европа, Западная Европа, Africa, Asia. Now, I didn't give you Antarctica, but I don't think that's quite as commonly used. At any rate, for the West, right, I mean, that obviously comes up all the time in Russian, diplomacy and politics or whatever. Zapad, right, so you simply say, just like we do in the West, meaning Western Europe, the US, etc. Na Zapadye would mean in the West. The East, Vostok, right, which in Russia, this is always a kind of a historically very kind of complicated topic, but nowadays in Vostok, I guess, sort of like the Orient, right, the East, Asia, the Near East, as they call it, we say the Middle East in English, but in Russian they say the Near East. That's Ближний Восток. which means, again, literally the Near East, and then the Far East, which would be specifically Asia, Дальний Восток. Right now, again, it's a very complicated question, but historically, when they say the East, Vostok, it's potentially a rather vague term. They may mean basically any Asiatic or even Near Eastern culture, basically anything that's not Europe, right? I mean, anything to the east as opposed to the west. So that kind of rather, sloppy or rather vague distinction. And again, you could be more specific now with Blижний Восток, Дальний Восток. A very important term, especially a lot of students I know these days are getting increasingly interested in Central Asia. That term is Srednyaya Asia. Note that it's not Centralnaya Asia. I mean, I guess you could say that and be understood, but that's not the normal term in Russian. You use Srednyaya, which just means middle or central. Okay, the Baltic countries, there are several ways to say that. You could say Pribaltika, meaning the area near the Baltic, or the Strany Balti, the countries of the Baltic. The Caucasus is Kavkaz. By the way, that's also a non-noun because it's, a lot of geographic features obviously are kind of sprawling surfaces or whatever, so a lot of them are non-nouns, and that includes mountain ranges. So the Caucasus it's a mountain range, so you'd say Na Kavkazia. And finally, a very important one in Russia, Sibir. That's an E noun, right? It's feminine. And note, first of all, that it's a V noun. So you say in Siberia, Sibiri, right? So again, we always have to be careful. Is a given noun a non-noun or a V noun? And you see, I just got done telling you that sprawling geographical spaces are usually non-nouns, but Siberia, of all places, isn't, right? Although it's hard to imagine a more sprawling geographical area. So anyway, you just have to watch out for that. Okay, so that's it for today. I'll post a separate video at some point talking about the Soviet anthem, which is always a favorite topic among students. It's in the book there if you want to see it, but we won't cover that right here in this particular video. Okay, anyway, until next time, до свидания, товарищи, вперед к новым победам.